I'm going to start the recording now so I can send it to all those folk that have opted to watch the football instead. So there is quite a lot of information tonight, so if you do have a paper and pen to be able to write stuff down, however, you will also be getting a follow-up email with a lot of the information. So first things first, just to set the scene a little bit with a Swift poem. So it goes, butterflies a fluttering, bluebells unfurling, but the true sign of summer is the wee swift returning. She's travelled here up to 7,000 miles, up to 70 miles per hour and facing endless trials, opportunistically feeding at 50 meters high, storing a bolus of 1,000 insects for when rations run dry. A life in the wing means 9 months in the sky and 3 months to nest. She used to land in sea cliffs and hollow trees, but now in buildings she'd rather rest. Into roof eaves she went, and that would indeed do, but now with development and demolition, that's gone too. In 23 years, numbers went down by 58%, an amber-listed species that we cannot allow to be further spent. But then we remember that in cultures past, the wee swift was a sign of hope that would last. And you can still help by giving nature a home and making Edinburgh a swift city where they'll be free to roam. So we'll be going into more detail about all of that today. I'm going to be talking about Edinburgh Swift Cities, the wonderful wee swift, the threats that the whole population is facing at the minute, and more positively what we can do about that, focusing on swift nests, swift surveys, and general bringing swift awareness into the city of Edinburgh. So, in terms of Edinburgh Swift Cities, the aim of the project is to protect and enhance swift population through conservation and community engagement. We're funded by ScottishPower Foundation until the end of August this year. There's a lot of aims to it, and there's two sides of the coin. There's the conservation perspective of it, and there is community education as well. So as you can see, in terms of conservation, the main thing is looking at surveys, and that's why you're all here tonight. So you're really a vital part of the project. Swift nests, looking also at their food source, so the insects that they eat and the habitat that support the insects. So looking at trees and wildflowers. Looking at casework, which is basically looking at developments that are happening in Edinburgh and suggesting swift bricks or swift boxes could go into them. Research into foraging behaviour, which is really exciting. That's going to be happening next month. And finally, the community education part of it. So workshops like these, both with professional bodies and on a community level. And what they've kind of looked like throughout the year. The main thing that one of the biggest outreach that we've done is the Swift Local Group. So that's a group of people that come to monthly meetings. There's between 30 or 60 people that come every month and do lots of different things that I've named before. So there's the casework, there's the creative group that designed this beautiful artwork. And they did a nest box making workshop, different things like that. So if you're interested to get involved in that, it's something that we hope will continue after this project funding's finished. If you're interested in getting involved with that, let me know and you can become part of the mailing list for it. In terms of who else we've been working with, lots of hubs within the city of Edinburgh, different schools as well, and youth groups, different communities, so the colony of artists that are in Abbey Hill. This is the Salisbury Centre, the Edinburgh Tool Library, and also St Mary's Cathedral and St Ninian's Church, and we contacted them through working with the Eco Congregation Group. This is the National Federation for Roofing Companies, so working on that sort of level as well. And also the Edinburgh City Council and Barrett's Homes. So we've been working with lots of different people throughout the city in many different ways. It's been quite nice to, the roofing people, for example, would tell me stories about how whenever they were doing roofing work, that they would be speaking to people who would be welcoming home the Swifts every year as if it was their summer family. And so it was really nice to reach outside the normal bubble that we can find ourselves in the environmental movement. Some things that we've It's happened as well. The Forge is a woodworking group within Edinburgh, and they helped to make a lot of nests. In total, there's been 80 swift nests installed, and another 30 to 40 to go up this season, and with the hope of about 90 in the next couple of years, with one of the housing developments that we're working with. We've also designed a Edinburgh self-led cycle and walking path, and that's going to be launched during Swift Awareness Week this July. So there's going to be all types of abilities. There's a walking one that will be around Arthur's Seat and around Leith Links, and then there's 3 different cycling paths that you can go on with for different abilities. And they're going to link up the Swift hubs, which is a building with lots of Swift nests on it, Swift streets, which is a street with multiple Swift hubs on it, mural sites, particularly one in Leith Links, and good survey spots or bird watching spots for the swifts. So the wee swift, and this ties into the survey work. One of the most common things that can happen with identifying swifts is mistaking them for its very similar looking relatives in some way. So I'm going to give you a wee moment here to see if you know which bird is the swift. Don't worry, you don't need to answer anything. We're not in school. You can speak to yourself. So, drum roll. The swift is this very first one, the Apis apis. Oh, it looks like somebody got it. Well done. So its Latin name is Apis apis, and that translates to without foot. And it's not that the swift bird doesn't have feet, it's that they used to think that it didn't have feet because it would never land. It flies for 9 months of the year and it only lands in its nest. It's very rarely seen walking on the ground. And this is not because it doesn't have feet, but actually it's got very short, weak legs, so it kind of falls over whenever it's going along the ground. Which is why whenever they nest, they need a lot of space beneath the nest, so they drop out and fly up again because they don't have the same strength to push themselves off the ground, like some other birds do. So extra points if you know the names of these other birds. They are, oh yeah, Jean does, the swallow and the house martin. And I'm just going to share a quite weird just way that I remember about these birds, because this is obviously a really important part of the training. So I think about the swallowtails, which were a coat that had really long tails at the back, and that's the swallow. So the difference between the swift and the swallow is those long tails at the back. How I remember the house martins, also a bit strange, but I think about the white house. And that is because the house martin looks very similar to the swift also. Its tail can look similar whenever it flies by in the sky, but its belly is what's very different. So the white house, or the house martin's belly is white, whereas the swift's is dark. So it's just a weird way to try and remember it. I hope you remember it while you're walking the streets doing some surveys. So as I said, short forked tail appears black in flight, and then these crescent-shaped wings. So the wingspan is 15 inches from either tip of the wings of the swift, whereas its nose to its tail is 7 inches. So it's actually width way, it's twice the size of its body. And you can really notice that in the sky, its wings almost look too big for its body. So something else to be aware of whenever you see them. So a way that is really helpful to remember exactly what a swift looks like, I was doing there's a thing in RSPB called nature prescriptions, and it's about connecting with nature for well-being, and I was doing something like that with one of the community groups, and it had a lot more like art and well-being stuff in that. But so one of the things that came from that was doing swift art. So you can either draw the swift or you can find some natural materials outside and make the shape of the swift. And as well as being very nice to do and therapeutic, it also really helps to embed the exact image of the swift. So I'm really hammering that home just because we have got some sites and we're like, oh, there's a swift here, and actually it's a swallow's nest and stuff. So it's really important. So a bit more information about the swifts. And they've got these really striking dark eyes, and they've got little bristles along their eyes, and the eyes are quite seated back in the head, and that's to help it whenever it's flying super duper fast. So the Apis apis is the fastest bird at level height. So at one height, it's the fastest recorded bird. It has really close competition with its cousin needle-tailed swift, but that hasn't been scientifically recorded. So the Apis apis is still the fastest. So the swift is built for serious speed, stamina, and skill. And I'll just mention briefly. In terms of its stamina, in the yellow is where it spends our summer months to breed. So from May until the end of July. And then it goes down to its winter feeding grounds from August and the whole way until the following April. So that's pretty far, as you know. And they are very, very small. They're actually the width or the weight of a cream egg. But this is the route that they go on. So they were tagged a couple of years ago in 2010 with this little chip at the back, and we were able to actually find exactly how they migrate, what countries they go through, and where they spend all of the winter. So that's actually above the Congo, where there's huge rainforests and lots of insects. And then for some reason they come back here, but they are following the insects as they move north. So they're literally flying for 9 months. They don't land. They're eating, drinking, bathing, and even mating on the wing. They can eat up to 1,000 insects a day. And whenever they're feeding their young, they've got a wee pouch underneath their chin that they store the bolus of insects in. And the bolus is a mixture of saliva and insects that gets stored in their mouth. Whenever they want to drink, they do this. They go along the water. My favorite fact about them is that they also obviously then sleep in the sky. So they go up more than 50 meters and they turn off half their brain and they just kind of float in the airwaves, which is pretty impressive. Like, we think humans are amazing, and then it's called like unihemispherical slow wave sleep or something like that. And it is also what dolphins do in the water as well. They're also mammals. Oh, they aren't mammals, or birds. So in terms of its babies, they're not the prettiest whenever they're born. They kind of look a bit like dinosaurs. The parents pair for life, and they actually meet back at the nest. So they manage to navigate their way the whole way to the Congo and back to the exact nest every year. The same pair. They lay between 1 to 3 little white eggs. It takes between 37 and 56 days for these to hatch. And at 4 weeks old, they start doing press ups to begin their super long journey. Because whenever they leave at 6 weeks, they're still juveniles. So for 2 full years, they don't land until they're ready to have their own brood. So they have to get big and strong for that. So for 2 weeks, they're doing press ups all day, every day. So another wee quiz for you. Based on how they looked, it might give a wee clue whenever they're first born, but I wonder if you know when the swifts evolved. So this is supposed to be the history of time. So another drum roll. They're evolved around here. The swifts are ancient, so whenever the T-Rex died out, that's when the swifts evolved. So a really, really, really long time ago, that we can't really conceptualize. Well, I can't. And despite being around so long, just in the last 20, 25 years, they've declined a huge amount. So this has actually been updated to between 1995 and 2018, the swifts have declined by 58%. So we're coming close to 2/3 of their decline just in the last 20 or 30 years, which is obviously really intense and sad. They're listed as amber conservation status, which doesn't sound very serious, but yeah, they're going closer to red maybe. And why is this? Well, it's not fully clear. There's a few considerations. As I mentioned, they eat the insects. And some of you might remember that like 20 or 30 years ago, you would have lots of insects on the screen whenever you went driving, whereas now you don't have that. Apparently it's because cars are more streamlined, but I don't know. I think it might have, there are other science papers that say that the insect population is plummeting, which could impact them. Also, their very, very lengthy migration route is obviously more susceptible to the increased intense weather conditions and storms and that kind of thing that's happening because of climate change. These two things are considered, but they haven't been kind of directly proven with research. But what has been, and what we know for sure, is that there's been a decrease in the swift population due to a decrease in habitat availability. So this is where the swifts nest, just underneath the eaves, here and here in these tiny crevices. And there's a few things that are happening to those. Sometimes people get their building done up, everything filled in basically, the roof done, the soffits, which are just the wood along underneath the eaves, can get closed up. We also have a really bittersweet situation where places are getting insulated, which is great for climate change and heat loss, but can sometimes result in swift nests being destroyed. And it really doesn't have to be that way as well, because there are examples about how we can look after the humans and we can look after the swifts. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Other things that happen are new builds not yet providing swift net and bricks or boxes, which is something we're working on with Barrett's. Also, a final thing that can happen is buildings being demolished without realizing that there's swifts there. So that's all really depressing. So I'm going to give you a moment to write down some fun facts or things that you've learned, or you can sketch it if you want, just to try and remember this part of the very lengthy presentation. So I'll just give you a wee moment. Does anyone want to say just one fact that's stood out for them? Robert, you're muted, but I think you're speaking.
Will I go for one?
Yep.
Cream egg, size of a cream egg.
Yeah. The power of advertisement.
Well, I'll certainly remember. I hate cream eggs,
Yeah.
but remember.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Apis apis is without feet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love looking at the Latin names. Was that yours as well, Scott? Yeah. Annie, were you going to say one?
No, it was the cream egg.
The cream egg as well. Brill. Cool. I can't see if anybody else is. Those are just the ones that come up. Okay. Great. So if you want to tell people fun facts about swifts, you've got it written down now. And we're going to move on to more positive things, because that was also quite depressing about what's happening. The really wonderful thing about swift conservation is that there's a lot of very tangible things that we can do, especially in urban environments, to protect the species and actually enhance and hopefully support an increase in the population. I really love this quote. Obviously it's talking about zero waste, so it seems pretty irrelevant, but if you apply it to conservation, and it says, we don't need a handful of people doing conservation perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. And I just really like that as a quote. Like, it shouldn't just be a few people doing it really intensely all the time. It should just be everybody doing a little bit and what you can manage. So going to look at little bit of focus into the Swift nests and some positive stories from Edinburgh. Swift surveys specifically, and the different realms of that. And then finally, a tiny little bit about spreading awareness at the end. In terms of seasonal activities, another great thing is that there's stuff you can do all year to support the swifts. So in winter, it's a really great time to plant trees, which again supports the insect population. Also a good time to make a swift nest box. In the spring, you can plant wildflowers again for the insects, and you can install the swift nest box in time for them arriving in the summer, which is the perfect time and the most important time of the seeds to the swift surveys. And they begin to leave, as I mentioned, at the start of August, but you can start looking ahead to planting wildflowers for the following year again, and planning out your swift nest box. Maybe it's something you could source in your community at work or at home, or make yourself. There's guidelines and stuff on the RSPB website to do that. Some really happy, positive stories about things that have happened in Edinburgh. So this is St Mary's Cathedral, and on the inside of St Mary's Cathedral, they have these boxes. On the inside of each of these boxes, there's 4 swift nests. So they have a total of 48 swift nests that have gone into their spires, which is super exciting. And hopefully one day, St Mary's is above the skyline of Edinburgh, so hopefully there'll be swifts coming in across the skyline into the church. So we've got our fingers crossed for maybe some uptakes this year. And that's the forge that I mentioned. They also put up some, they got really into making the swift boxes that they just were making way more than we commissioned them to make, and they were getting like the family members involved. And this guy actually made swift boxes for like his whole family for Christmas. So there's like some down in Cumbria and stuff, and Southampton, and yeah, he just went a bit mad with it really, which is amazing. And there's also a group, Tipperith, that's a community for adults with disabilities, and they've been making swift nest boxes to sell at their summer fair. So if you know Tipperith Summer Fair, you can buy some of theirs. This is St Ninian's Church on the right hand side. They put up 5 nest boxes, which is really wonderful. This is what they look like in more detail, and there's these wee holders for the eggs that go on the inside, to make sure no eggs roll out. We also created something called Swift Streets, so we put up swift nest boxes where there has been recently active swift nests. So swifts naturally nest in colonies. So whenever the baby have their offspring, the offspring will come back to the nests where they were born and try and find their own little cubby hole to make their own nests. So if we put up these nest boxes where there's already swifts, then there's more chance of them being taken up. And also in the Swift Streets, it's areas that are pesticide free or just super into gardening and have got either there's some places that just have wildflowers the whole way along the street, like right in the corner. The street in Ratho, they had dandelions the whole way along it. And yeah, people working in their gardens quite a lot. But it doesn't have to be in places that just have gardens. It can obviously be like in the city, you can do wildflower planting and be pesticide free. So just a wee bit of information. I just added this in because people asked for it in the last survey training, about where the nest boxes should go. So like those ones that were made. And the best place to go is 5 meters away on a house that's 5 meters away from a large tree, because that's where predators can sit. For it to be 5 meters high with no obstructions underneath. So as I said about their little weak legs and they kind of just like flop out of the nest box, there can't be any obstructions beneath, and they need space to dive down and gain momentum and fly back up. I was going to say swim, fly back up again. They don't swim. Yeah, so if there's like a building that's kind of if there's a chimney and it's got a slanty roof underneath it, it's not appropriate for it. It needs to be underneath the eaves with no obstructions. So that's a really big point. So the wee crosses are above the windows. So areas that there's a lot of maintenance happening to them, like window cleaning or an electric box or something like that, for them not to be above that, but it's okay for them to be above areas that don't have the windows or other maintenance, just to reduce disturbance for them. And the final thing to think about is what aspect the wall is. So it's best to be north, northeast, northwest, and this avoids overheating in the summer. So these are some of the other options as well that can be put up. In the gable ends here, the top left picture, there's all these wee holes, and in the inside, so similar to the church, in the inside there's nest boxes against the little holes in the attic. The top right are the soffits, and that's a plank of wood partitioned into separate swift nests, and they've got the little entrances there. The research shows that they don't mind being really close together if you're thinking to put in lots. There's these swift bricks that look like normal bricks on the outside, but on the other side of the wall, there's massive chambers for the swifts to be in. And the bottom right here is an example from the RSPB website of a swift nest box that you can buy, and that can just get fixed to an external wall underneath the eaves using stone drills and wall plugs. Ways that you can improve that. So as I said, putting them in areas that there are already nests. If you put a new swift box beside there, then it's more likely to be taken up. It's also more likely to be taken up if you put in a swift collar. And there's ways that you can get swift calls to be put into close to where the nest is to attract the swifts. So another little pause and thought. Do you think that any of these swift nest boxes might be possible for you in your home or work building? And is it something you could source or amongst the community or buy? So St Mary's, they obviously have a huge congregation, but they got like somebody involved in who's into woodworking, and somebody else that works on something that got the wood, and they've basically made it really minimal cost. So yes, some inspiration. Cool. Thanks for responding to stuff, Scott. Okay, so we're getting there. We're at Swift surveys now, and we will continue. So why do we want to do Swift surveys? To empower people to create those Swift streets that I was mentioning, like streets with lots of people informed about Swifts on them, and putting them in the nest boxes, becoming pesticide free. It's really vital information and citizen science. We will actually use it to protect buildings and existing nests. So where there's development going ahead, we can respond to it and say, did you know that there's swift nests on that building? And therefore it should be protected, particularly in the summer months that they're nesting. It also helps us focus our conservation efforts. We can give higher protection and local habitat enhancement in areas that there's lots of swifts. Particularly for our project, part of it is carrying out as many surveys as possible. And a more focused part of it is doing this research project into their foraging behaviour, where we're going to catch swifts, tag them, and be able to see exactly where around Edinburgh they go to eat, which is super exciting. However, to do this, we are looking for specific buildings. So it's swift nests where there's where it's 2 floors, so that it's more easy to access them and catch them. I'll say a wee bit more about that in a moment, though. So back to correct identification. Re-quiz time. If you remember it from earlier, this is the swift, this is the swallow, and this is the house martin. In terms of its behaviour and surveys, so small anecdote, I was doing a workshop with a group of P7s last week, and I was getting them to act out all of these behaviours, and it was really hilarious. There's something swifts do that I'll mention in a bit, these screaming parties. So I had like 40 11-year-olds running around screaming as Swift screaming parties. So if you want to try and remember their behavior, try acting out. It's really helpful. And it's very relevant to the surveys as well. So in terms of Swift behavior, when they're flying, there's so many different things they can be doing. If they're more than 50 meters high, it's likely that they are feeding. Whenever they're feeding, their behavior is quite slow, and with the airwaves as well. Yeah, and they're moving around. Sometimes they can be by themselves or they can be in groups. But the biggest characteristic of that is that they're at 50 meters high. I said slow, but actually they can kind of swoop around as well. So the main thing is how high they are. Whenever they're migrating, they're flying slower, drifting along in one direction. But that's obviously not so likely now because they arrive in May and leave in August. What else they can be doing in the sky is screaming parties that I mentioned, of these kids running around screaming. This is whenever they're less than 50 meters high and they're flying low along the eaves and roofs over houses and screaming. And it sounds really bad that they're screaming, but it's quite a nice scream somehow. They do another behavior called arcing, which is, again, they're less than 50 meters, flying low over a house repeatedly back and forth. So a bit like boomerang behavior, arcing round and round and round. And the final behavior that they can do in the sky is bangers, which is basically they fly up to a nest and hit it. And that's to check if there's any swifts already in there. And basically the swifts in there will either respond back and be like, we're in here, don't come in, or else if there's no response, then they might go into the nests. Apparently there's things can get really nasty if they end up in the same small space, different adults. And this is actually how I was able to identify a nest the other day, that I saw the screaming parties happening, and then was looking along the eaves and saw the banger behavior happening, where they went up specifically to one area and came down, and then they had flown away, but I could still hear the noise in the underneath the eaves where they had gone up to and hit, kind of thing. So it really helped to be able to identify where the nests are. So because these are really important points as well, I'm going to repeat myself a lot about this. So if they are more than 50 meters high, they are feeding and migrating. And how you record that is using bird track. So that's something completely separate to SwiftMapper. It's not information that we are particularly interested in, though it's still great to add to Swift records. So that is feeding behavior and migrating behavior. So 50 meters high, bird track. And I'm going to send you out a pack that's got the methodology and stuff. So this will have some of this information to do with the Swift surveys. So don't worry about copying it down from now. When Swifts are flying less than 50 meters high, so screaming parties along the roofs, underneath the eaves, arcing over the house, bangers going up to the nest, that's all less than 50 meters high. And that's the behavior that we're really interested in when the Swifts are flying. So that information goes on SwiftMapper, and you use the little blue icon. So SwiftMapper, it's swiftmapper.org. Again, this will be sent to you. And it's an online free to use website where you can log this behavior. You have to make a username and password, but other than that, it's free to use, and also super interesting. It's not just in Edinburgh, it's all over the UK, so you can, no matter where you are, go and see if there's Swifts on that street and see if you can check them out. So it's quite an exciting new tool. So again, that's the screaming parties, less than 50 meters high, arcing, bangers. I'll stop repeating myself like 7 times. And the other thing that SwiftMapper records is the nesting behavior. And this can be quite tricky to see. They can be really secretive and discreet. There's one, whenever I was out yesterday, there were Swifts, they were doing the arcing behavior, like going back and forth. So I was watching them for a while, and then I realized there was some gulls in the area. I don't know if this is exactly why they were doing it, but I wondered if they were doing that to avoid going into their nest because the gulls were watching, kind of thing. But they can go in super fast. They go in at like 40 miles per hour and do a sudden break without squishing themselves against the wall. But it basically means they can be really easily missed. This is my point again. Sorry. Hope you remember it. So that's the behavior, that's Swift Mapper. Looking for the Swift nests. So because they are really difficult to spot whenever you go in, you can do it the other way around, where you look for tiny crevices underneath the eaves of houses and just kind of stand there and look at them for a really long time until they come in. Often at certain times they're feeding their young between 30 to 60 minutes, every 30 to 60 minutes. So if you were standing in one place looking at one crevice for 30 minutes, you're likely to see them. And what do the Swift nests look like? So the ones that aren't those people-made ones I showed you earlier are the more kind of natural, I mean, still in buildings, but they're ones that Swifts have found themselves. And these can be underneath tiles, they can be on the edge of the roof, underneath the eaves, in tiny holes in the walls. And I've got a few examples for you here. So I wonder if you could spot there where that Swift nest is. Yeah, I know it's not a very good picture, but my iPhone's not that great a picture. And it's also, yeah. Okay, so there, tiny little crevice, which you wouldn't expect even a cream egg to get through, but they do. Another one that I saw here, and I sent this to Scott and I was like, no, the magpie. I don't know if you can even make it out, but there was this magpie that was like proper checking out the Swift. Well, I don't know if it was a nest. I didn't stay long enough to see, and Scott was saying maybe the hole is a little bit too big. It could be a house sparrow. But yeah, looking at predator behavior could also be a potential way to try and spot them. And that's it, just there. And this, again, is not a very good picture, but it was more to show an example of those wee pipes that come out underneath the eaves. Often that can create little holes for the swifts. So I saw quite a lot of those yesterday. So again, underneath the eaves, beside the pipes, they can get their way in. But basically just looking under the eaves is the best bet. So looking at next steps, at the end of this training, you'll get an email that will have a link to a Google Drive that's got these 6 documents in it. So you'll just get an email with a link, basically, and you just click on that. In it, there'll be a welcome letter, there'll be specific streets to sign up for, which I'll come back to, a methodology of how to do it. There's a reminder, so a lot of what we've covered. A letter to confirm validity, which I would invite you to print out and take with you, because in some places you can end up kind of stood there staring at people's houses, and we ended up having interesting chats yesterday, Scott. Yeah, it's just good to let people know what you're doing and try not to come across too creepy. But this letter has got RSPB logo and stuff, and it's been signed and stuff, so it'll hopefully give people peace of mind. There is also in this pack, there's recording forms. I would recommend going straight onto SwiftMapper, so smartphone, keep it charged, logging the information as you go. It's really easy to use. You just add record, and then it asks you different questions about it. If you're not super happy with that, you can print out recording forms and write the information down, and then log it whenever you get home, if that's easier for you. And then part 6 of it is just a recap of what I've been saying about the identification, the different behaviours that they exhibit, just to refresh. We would ask to do a minimum of 2 surveys per month in June and July, if possible. It'd be brilliant. There is an ideal time and condition to do the surveys. So if you're very active in the morning, half an hour before dawn for 2 hours after, which is obviously like 4 a.m. at the minute or something. So if you're up for that, you're very welcome to go then. You can also go for 2 hours before dusk and half an hour after dusk. There also can be a time where they're very active, a lot of screaming parties, a lot of feeding. And then the best weather condition is dry, calm, and still weather. Again, you'll be recording the screaming parties and the nest sites, and that's what these icons are, to recap. Basically just try and do as many streets as you can in your local area. Areas that have been surveyed, it's really great to go there and see if the survey information is up to date. Areas that haven't been surveyed, it's also really great to go there. It might be a kind of socioeconomic skew about who knows about SwiftMapper and takes part in the survey. So actually areas that haven't been mapped yet are really great to go to. And you can just see on SwiftMapper what areas haven't been mapped. If you do suspect a nest in somewhere, as I mentioned, 30 minutes at that site is ideal. And yeah, again, be friendly. I had some really nice chats yesterday with people on the street about Swifts. We actually met this guy Felix that's like 6 years old and knew everything about Swifts and was just telling us about all these different birds. It was really lovely. So yeah, he ended up having nice conversations. What you could do if you wanted to break it down into this way, because they're kind of different activities, but you don't have to, it's just a suggestion. If you do 2 different types of walks, so for walk 1, go onto SwiftMapper and specifically look for screaming parties. So we know at this point that's the arcing behavior, banging behavior, flying low, less than 50 meters. And to do that, you kind of can just walk quite freely, looking at the sky and looking at eaves. Whereas for walk 2, you could go back to areas that you saw a lot of screaming behavior happening, because that could be indicative, as I mentioned earlier, that could be indicative that there are nests there, and that either they're flying over and there's predators they don't want to go in, or they're looking for nests themselves and going up to nests that have already been occupied. Whereas whenever you're looking for the nests, you could go back to those areas and just stand by them for half an hour to 30 minutes. So focusing on areas where you saw screaming parties, get a good vantage point to observe them leaving and arriving. Look for swifts, record the house number or name on SwiftMapper. You can go in the dusk or the early morning. And here's an extra little bit. So whenever it's warm or dry weather, the peak time that chicks are getting fed is between 11 and 12 noon, not AM, or late afternoon between 4 or 5 p.m. And that's whenever the weather is cool, damp. And again, more information about why 30 to 60 minutes is because they're coming back to get fed. So it's quite likely that you'll see them returning at this point. So I've got a focused request. If you have a lot of time in the next week, we really need a lot of help to secure some of the sites for the research in the summer. And as I mentioned, this is going to be on where there's active nests on buildings that are 2 stories. And this is to allow access for catching them and tagging them and then removing the tag again. So we've got 7 locations that we need a lot of volunteer power on, and we need it fast. So if you have the time to do that, in the welcome pack, there's a number 2, there's an Excel spreadsheet, and that will have the 7 different locations on it. So you just write your name beside it if you're going to do that, because if we don't do that, then everybody might do the 1 street kind of thing. So we can still have a few people doing those locations each, but if there is one that hasn't been surveyed, then it would be brilliant if you were able to do that. They are all over Edinburgh, really. So hopefully there'll be one close to you. And if you do that focused research, if you just add the information as normal, so even if there's a Swift nest box that's been recorded there, it might be from 2017, so you can just do a repeat survey addition icon. What not to do: go into private property, use binoculars into people's bedroom windows because it might freak them out a little bit. Record swifts above 50 meters again. And we also don't need to survey undeveloped areas, so meadows, green areas, canal, lochs. Yeah, it's more above urban spaces that we're interested in because that's where they nest. In terms of safety, obviously follow the COVID regulations if they change. If possible, carry out surveys with someone else. Where it's not possible, let somebody know where you are and when you'll be returning and what to do if you do not return within the agreed period of time. Carry a charged mobile phone and wear light clothing and reflectors. If at any time you feel unsafe during the survey, abandon it immediately and take steps to make yourself safe. Do not survey after dark. Okay, that was so much information. So I'm going to pause here again and ask if you got any questions. You've probably been, I've not actually seen the chat box, but I think there's a lot been going on.
What is it now that you'd expect swifts to be taking up nest boxes? Or
So
has it happened or?
yeah, so they do come back at the start of May, and that is often whenever they nest. However, it's still a really great time to put them up because the swifts that were born last year or even this year, they're still flying. They've not created their own nest yet. So again, particularly in areas where swifts have nested recently, the juveniles will come back and check it out basically. It's called prospecting. They'll come and see, and in their very intelligent brains store that information for next year, and then they'll come back to that spot again to nest. So it's still really worth putting up nests. And actually this year as well, we've had quite a couple of people on the ground saying that there's a lot less swifts back so far. There's a Facebook group, maybe some of you know it, it's called All Things Swift UK, and that's had quite a lot of messages on it saying that my swifts aren't back, basically, like even now, and that could be because of the really cold spring that we had. Yeah, they might have come up and left. I don't know, that was such a guess, that's probably not accurate at all. But basically, yeah, it still is a good time to put up the nest boxes.
Okay, thanks.
I've got not so much a question, maybe more like a suggestion. But thank you so much, Katie. That was so interesting. And what I was wondering, and what was kind of coming to my mind, is that I'm an ecologist, but I kind of specialize in bats. Is more my specialism. I don't really do bat work now, like as part of my job, but I do it as like a volunteer in my free time. There's so much overlap with swifts and bats, and I've seen loads of swifts when I've been surveying for bats. When you're trying to get, more people to submit records and things, have you tried like talking to Lothian Bat Group or local bat ecologists and getting people to double up? Because I was just thinking that's a great time to do it, especially if you're bat surveying, like stuck staring at a building for hours in the middle of the night, and you're saying, oh, people think you look creepy. I'm like, I've been there looking for bats just standing. So yeah,
that's such a great idea. Yeah, I'll totally definitely get involved with that. Is that Lothian Bat Ringers?
Yeah, or Lothian, what are these called? Yeah, Lothian Bat Group. I can pass you an email for Lothian Bat Group if you like. And they're amazing. They're really nice. I'm in Lothian Bat Group, and I'm even as well just like consultant ecologists, but I don't know where to really start with that because there's so many of them. Yeah, but I used to be a consultant. I do have some contacts I can reach out to as well, but they're there anyway, staring at buildings, so they'd be as well, get that extra information.
That would be fab. That would be really, really good. Yeah, anybody, yeah. Let me know.
Great.
really
Will
appreciate it.
do.
Water of Leith, yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, yeah, okay. So there's no more questions. I'll just say a couple more things. Yeah, I'll stop looking at the chat. It's just kind of looking ahead. To a bit more information, sorry. If you do find a nest, like say on your street, you might become quite protective of it because there's swifts on your street and that's pretty cool. But here's just like a couple of things that you can bear in mind over the next year and just like the time ahead, just so that you feel equipped to protect the swifts. So protecting a swift nest box. What you can do is just regularly check it throughout the year. So on a daily walk or walking your dog or whatever, just keeping a wee eye on it. If you become aware of any development that's happening, so it could be installation, renovation, demolition, there's a couple of things you can do. Obviously like to believe in the goodness of people and imagine that it is just lack of awareness about knowing about it, and if you do just let them know that they're there, there might be a way to work it out that the swifts are protected as well. So you could, if you maybe you might know the homeowner, or you could contact the website of the tradespeople that are working there, kind of just give them a ring or something. There's 4 options that can happen. Obviously Gold Star is leaving the nest alone, particularly during the swift season. Do not work on the roof while the swifts are nesting, so that's between May and August. Preserve the swift's nest access hole or make new ones to match it exactly. So that's particularly removing any nets in front of it, like that might be on the scaffolding, or any other obstructions. There's a really positive example about this happening where there was, this is in a church down south in England, there was just some people that lived beside the church and they knew that the swifts came back every year, and whenever they saw the roof renovation happen, they just talked to the church, and it was outside of nesting season, and the builders, the tilers, the roofers removed the tiles and marked exactly where those entrance holes were. Whenever they put the tiles back on, they just made that tiny little hole, obviously protected in the right way. And it's just such a lovely example of both people being happy. Last case, that if the nest can't be, the hole can't be made again, then to install the nest boxes that we mentioned earlier, and the external ones or the bricks or the different options that there are for the swift nests. If things aren't super going your way, you just to let you know, all birds in the UK are protected under these 2 acts, and more specifically in Scotland. And what it says is that you're not allowed to damage or destroy or otherwise interfere with the nest of any wild bird while it is in use or being built. So that can be from April, and so, not for the swifts. For other birds, they can start nesting in April, but the swifts start nesting in May. You're not allowed to recklessly obstruct or prevent any wild bird from using its nest, so again during swift season, and also destroy the egg of any wild bird. So just so that you know that, can let people know. Finally, spreading awareness. We've got some lovely little things about the swift. It's associated with hope in some folklore because it's whenever the summer returns at the start of May, whenever it's supposed to be the nice weather, but that didn't happen this year. It's meant to be summer. A lot of people have been very inspired because of this. There's lots of poems and songs written about swifts. And we have a little creative campaign going on, where people have been sending in swift poems, swift stories, swift artwork, and this was done by 2 really great volunteers, Leslie and Sonia. So if you were into that kind of thing, could write a haiku maybe and send it to the Edinburgh Swift local group. And this work will be presented during Swift Awareness Week with the wrong date on it there. It's the 3rd to the 11th of July. And finally, keep your eyes peeled for the self-led cycle or walking path that will be during Swift Awareness Week at these dates. And in this follow-up email that you'll receive, it will have a link to the website that details all the different routes and the hubs and the Swift streets and the mural sites and different things like that. Okay, I'm finally going to stop talking. There's a lot of information and yeah, hopefully you'll be able to catch up with it with the follow-up email. But I just wonder if there is any further questions from anyone or...
Katie, I just wanted to say that I think on the last one of these survey trainings that you did, I think quite a few people didn't get an email link to you and weren't able to contact. So if that doesn't happen, if you don't have an email sent to you, it might be because Katie didn't get your email address. So if you want to email Katie directly, she can make sure that she sends out the link and stuff.
Yeah. I did change it with Eventbrite. I found something, Scott, to change with Eventbrite. They send a follow-up. So if you registered with Eventbrite, you should be able to get, because last time it was 2 different platforms and stuff. So hopefully you, but still take my email address. And if you don't get that follow-up email, please do get in touch. That's my email. So did you get everything? Do you think? It wasn't too much information. And if anybody is able to do that thing of going to specific sites in the next week, please do let me know that you're doing that. You can either email me or put it onto the Excel spreadsheet. Oh, thanks for your comments. Cool. Well, I'll let you go on then and digest that information. And good luck if you go out for any surveys and let me know. It would be great. It would be great to hear. All the best.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.